I know we're all humble. Hey, in the interest of time, we're going to start the Utilities and Commerce Committee. We're going to start as a subcommittee. And do we have any authors who are ready to present? Ms. Buchanan, if you're ready, we can start with AB 841.
Thank you very much. Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I'm pleased to represent AB 841, which will authorize the California Public Utilities Commission to require interconnected voice over Internet protocol service providers to collect and remit state universal service surcharges on their California intrastate revenues. I would like to begin by accepting the committee amendment to require to require the CPUC to collect the state universal service surcharges. Universal service has long been an important public policy objective on both the federal and the state level. The Federal Communications Commission already requires interconnected VoIP service providers to contribute to the federal universal service funds. Last fall, the FCC declared the way for the application of state universal service surcharges to interconnected VoIP services by stating that interconnected VoIP providers benefit from state universal service funds just as they benefit from the federal universal service fund, because their customers value the ability to place calls to and receive calls from users of the public switch telephone network. In January, the CPUC opened a rulemaking to address this issue at the state level. This legislation is needed to provide the CPUC with statutory authority to require interconnected VoIP providers to contribute to the state universal service funds. At the same time, AB 841 clarifies that this authorization does not create any other CPUC authority or jurisdiction over VoIP. In 2008, SB 1040 by Kehoe established similar standards to require VoIP providers to collect the state emergency 911 surcharge. Contribution by interconnected VoIP providers at the state level will help to ensure the current universal system is uniform, equitable, and competitively neutral. I've been working with stakeholders to develop the provisions of AB 841, and many of them are here to state their support. With me today is Bill Devine with AT&T, the sponsor of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Bill Devine, and I represent AT&T. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And I also want to thank the author, Assemblywoman Buchanan, for introducing this bill. Her statement is so thorough that I don't know that there's too much we can add to the conversation. I would like to highlight, however, that this legislation is being brought forth by the industry because we are very strong supporters of the universal service funds here in California. And we believe all providers of telecommunications service should collect these funds from their customer so these programs can continue to be healthy and move forward into the future. As Assemblymember Buchanan highlighted, this was an issue we tackled in 2009, dealing with state 911 funds, where we worked closely as an industry group with VoIP providers and at that time Senator Kehoe to create a mechanism for collecting these funds by the state of California. So we're following that same pattern for the universal service funds. We would urge the committee to support this bill. Thank you for your consideration.
Great. Next witness.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Boring with Frontier Communications, and we are a mid-sized provider in California, and we also serve nationwide. But we are a strong supporter of public programs and support this bill, and thank the author for bringing it forward. We ask for your support.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Kurt Rasmussen from Verizon. Verizon supports this legislation and asks for your aye vote. Thank you.
Ms. McIntyre.
Mr. Chairman and members, Carolyn McIntyre on behalf of the California Cable and Telecommunications Association, also in support of the bill. I also would like to point out that our member companies provide VoIP service to over 2.5 million Californians. I'd also like to point out that in spite of what the analysis said, VoIP customers, at least those that are served by our companies, do in fact pay the public purpose program or public goods charges currently. and we are supportive of this legislation that would basically result in them continuing to do so.
Great. Madam Secretary, let's establish quorum.
Bradford,
Aye. Here.
Fletcher, Buchanan,
Here.
Fong, Fuentes, Furutani, Gurrell, Hernandez, Huffman, Knight, Ma, Nastandi, Skinner, Swanson,
Present.
Valadeo.
All right. Quorum has been established. Any more witnesses in support?
McKay Carney on behalf of TechNet in support.
Witnesses in opposition?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Edward Randolph with the California Public Utilities Commission. The Commission did take a formal vote to oppose this bill last Thursday. Our opposition on this bill is not based on an opposition to collecting the universal service fees universally from all telephone providers or all telephone customers. In fact, we have opened a proceeding in January to look at this very issue and have an open rulemaking right now with comments already filed on if and how to collect those fees. Our opposition, though, is with the overall manner in which the bill has been written, and some of the language in there that would be potentially read down the road by the Commission or future courts that to limit what we believe is our full range of jurisdiction over certain types of certain types of VoIP service today. And this becomes a big concern over the next couple of years as some of the companies that just came up and testified switch from providing telephone through what's oftentimes referred to as POTS, plain old telephone service, to using their own networks to provide voice over internet protocol. In a lot of these cases, this isn't going to be offered as a means, as the ads you see for Vonage or those type of companies, which is using the internet. This is going to be using their own networks, and the main reason for switching to VoIP in those cases is it's a more efficient way to use their own networks, but they're still using their own networks, and most customers won't even realize they're using VoIP. They're going to think they're still using basic telephone service. And if the Commission doesn't have jurisdiction over terms and conditions, over issues like cramming and billing disputes, no one in the state of California would have those jurisdictions. So our concern is this bill, while addressing a very particular important issue, and the language needs to be better refined to leave status quo in place as our overall jurisdiction.
Lenny Goldberg on behalf of TURN. Our concerns are very much the same. VoIP becomes an integrated part of the network. This bill looks like the legislature is saying we have to, in order to collect this money for public purpose programs, we have to explicitly assert this control. What that does is potentially over time, in the language of this bill, mean that the PUC would not have the jurisdiction over telephone service that is done through this technology. So we have always supported public purpose programs. We've worked very closely with the carriers on High Cost Fund B, on a variety, on all, extending out all the public purpose program surcharges. So that part of the bill is certainly very admirable. The problem is the jurisdictional question that gets raised here is one that could lead to telephone consumers not having consumer protections that they have under the jurisdiction of the PUC in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Fuentes, you had a question?
I wanted to sort of express the same concerns with the bill, and I've spoken with the author about that and look forward to hopefully the bill's passage to the next committee, which is appropriations. I agree that there's the surcharge issue needs to be addressed, which is why I think this is a very good bill, but I do have the same concerns, so I'm looking forward to working with you on making certain that there is no sort of confusion that the Public Utilities Commission is where the jurisdiction needs to lie so that we protect the consumers and ultimately the level of service. So I'm prepared to move the bill at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Swanson.
I'll prepare to second the bill.
The bill has been moved and seconded. Any members with any additional questions? Ms. Buchanan, would you like to close?
Yes, I would. I think this is an important bill because we're going to sustain the universal service programs long term. We have to be sure that they're adequately funded and that funding continues as technology advances. With respect to the concerns of the CPUC, I received a letter Friday afternoon with the concerns. Spent my Mother's Day morning reading through a pile about an inch thick. Mr. Randolph and I met this morning, and then I received a text when I was on the floor. So I'm more than happy to work with him and work with Assemblymember Fuentes to clarify the bill if needed. The intent of this bill is, as I said in the beginning, is very narrow, to make sure that we continue to fund these universal service programs on an ongoing basis as technology changes, and I respectfully ask your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. We have a motion. We have a second. It's a due pass as amended to appropriations. And just let me state what those amendments are. In the PUC Code, Section 285C, replace may with shall require the interconnect voice over internet protocol service providers to collect and remit surcharges on their California interstate revenues in support of universal service funds. So, Ms. Buchanan, I appreciate you taking those amendments, and I also want to echo the concerns that have been raised by Mr. Fuentes in making sure that we continue to move forward as expressed by the PUC in addressing those issues, and I thank you for your commitment to move forward. So, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher?
Aye.
Fletcher, aye. Buchanan?
Aye.
Buchanan, aye. Fong? Fuentes? Aye. Fuentes, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gurel? Hernandez? Huffman? Knight? Knight, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Nastandi? Nastandi, aye. Skinner? Skinner, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo? Valadeo, aye.
Ms. Buchanan, that bill's out 11-0. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And before we can continue on, let me just quickly state some housekeeping matters. Again, Mr. Gurel is absent, and there will not be a replacement for him today with the committee. And AB 449 by Ms. Mitchell has been pulled. It will not be heard by this committee today. In addition, I want to thank Assemblyman Blumenfield for working with this committee. Just later today, he pulled 1268, so he was prepared to testify, and this committee not take a vote on that bill, but he has waived that right as well, so we will not be hearing 1268 today. So our next author is Mr. Fuentes, AB 1073, if you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm presenting on Assembly Bill 1073. Let me begin by accepting the committee's suggested amendments reflected on page 4 of the analysis. I also want to state my commitment to work with the stakeholders to resolve any issues that may arise should the bill move forward today. This bill is designed to ensure additional accountability over ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs funds by requiring applications for energy efficiency rebates to include a copy of the building permit associated with the rebate. Under existing law, state and local building codes govern energy efficiency construction projects. In order to incentivize these projects, rebates are provided to ease the financial burden that comes with construction upgrades that reduce energy consumption. Recently, contractors and consumers have lodged complaints to the California Energy Commission about the violations of the state's building and appliance energy efficiency standards. For example, a recent analysis indicates that required proper permits are obtained in less than 10% of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning replacements in existing buildings. Less than 10%. Similar results have been found for re-roofing projects. Lacking appropriate permits, many contractors avoid compliance with energy efficiency regulations. It also puts contractors who comply with the law at a competitive disadvantage compared to those who do not obtain a permit, and obviously does not move the revenues that are necessary for these types of projects. With limited resources, it is important to ensure that energy efficiency projects are done according to proper standards. I have witnesses today in support of the bill, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair, members, Eduardo Martinez on behalf of the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers. I thank the author and thank your staff for their work. I would just add to his eloquent presentation that if we're going to be using ratepayer funds to incentivize and provide for these rebates, we ought to make sure that the work is done according to all applicable laws and regulations, and one of which currently being that a building permit be issued and obtained whenever this work is complete. So on behalf of the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors. We are the contractor groups that largely follow the law and are concerned about Title 24 implementation. Title 24 is what the CEC has put out in terms of energy efficiency. To the extent that people are not complying with the law, they can bid jobs up to 40% less than we can. Price is king in the market. At the end of the day, people will go with non-compliant systems. We need to have the permits as part of the equation. Without 1073, the public dollars for energy efficiency will not yield the result it seeks to achieve, and the people that we employ are not going to be doing the work. So we would like to see this bill get passed.
Thank you. Additional witnesses.
Mr. Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, also in support. We want to thank the author for introducing this very important piece of legislation. As was mentioned before, the permit pooling process is vital. It also indicates that if a proper permit is not pooled, then other violations are typically occurring, including with substandard installation. Substandard installation also means that you won't see the energy savings attributed to the actual goals of the programs that we're talking about here. For those reasons, we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support.
Good afternoon. Victoria Rome with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we're in support. We're working on a similar bill, a bill that contains a similar provision on the Senate side, and we think this is an important provision to make sure that all of California's energy efficiency standards realize their full potential. Thank you.
I'll move the bill.
All right. It's been moved by Ms. Skinner, seconded by Ms. Buchanan. Witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, hearing none. Mr. Fuentes, would you like to close?
Again, happy to accept those amendments that were on page 3. I apologize for saying page 4 previously. Urge and I vote.
Ms. Skinner, you had a question?
Yeah, just want to make a comment. I wanted to express my thanks to the author. I'm also very pleased that the roofing component was included in this. That what you're trying to protect or ensure with this bill is very essential. And last year, I was trying to come up with a vehicle for how to. One of the requirements now in our new Title 24 is the cool roofs, but we discovered that it's a huge percent of roofs are re-roofed without a permit. And so we weren't getting cool roofs. And of course, local governments are losing money with the lack of pulling the permit and, a whole variety of things. So when I was trying to figure out a way to get at it, it didn't occur to me to do something like this. This is brilliant, and really appreciate your introducing this and think it's a great bill.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner. Any additional comments, questions? Okay, we have a motion. It's been made by Ms. Skinner, seconded by Ms. Buchanan to do pass as amended to the Assembly floor, and I'll just state those amendments that have been accepted by Mr. Fuentes, and I appreciate that. One, to expand the requirements to include gas utilities and public-owned utilities. Require that the rebate applicant self-certify that they have obtained appropriate building permits from the local jurisdiction having authority and received final permit approval. Clarify that nothing in this bill is intended to prohibit an owner who builds or improves a structure on his or her property and personally does all the work installing energy efficiency measures from receiving energy efficiency rebates. And lastly, clarify that nothing in this bill is intended to prohibit entities which are lawfully exempt from state contractors' license requirements from installing measures that will receive energy efficiency rebates. So, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher? Aye. Fletcher, aye. Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Fong? Fuentes?
Aye.
Fuentes, aye. Furtani? Gurel? Hernandez? Aye. Hernandez, aye. Huffman? Knight? Aye. Knight, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Nastandi? Nastandi, aye. Skinner? Skinner, aye. Swanson. Swanson, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye.
Mr. Fuentes, that bill's out 11-0, and if you're ready, you can continue with AB's 1074.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before presenting the bill, I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and your staff for doing a lot of work in a very short period of time. I think it's fair to say we would not have made as much progress on this measure if it weren't for your staff and your assistance, and I gladly accept the language suggested in the analysis as author's amendments. This bill will speed the deployment of next-generation 911 services. Next-gen 911 means moving the current 911 system, which can only be delivered over voice telephone calls, to an Internet Protocol or IP-based system. IP is a format that drives the Internet, and putting 911 service on an IP platform will allow the system to perform functions that are not possible on a switched telephone network. The most immediate examples are companies that can quickly process GPS location data. On an IP system, these companies can be contacted by the 911 system, identify the location of a wireless 911 caller in real time, and deliver the location of the caller to the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP, in the time it takes to answer the call. Where a wireless caller cannot speak or identify their location, this type of service could save people's lives. Transitioning to an IP-based system is the first step towards making it possible in the future to send a text to 911, although additional steps would be required before that becomes a reality. These other service providers, however, are not covered under the liability protections extended to all other parts of the 911 system. This bill, AB 1074, would provide the same level of protection to these other service providers that telephone companies have now. But it's important to note only when the service is used in connecting a 911 call. AB 1074 will facilitate the expansion of 911 service and improve public safety. Today I have witnesses in support of the measure, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Witnesses in support.
Mr. Chair and members, Cyrus Stevers with Verizon. Assemblyman Fuentes Act, thoroughly described the bill, so I will limit myself to where we're at with the amendments and the amendments suggested in the analysis. The challenge that we faced in crafting this bill and working with the opposition presented by Kalnina was to ensure that the bill's liability protections did not extend beyond the 911 network, specifically perhaps to consumer devices, which consumers can use to contact 911. We ran into trouble when Ledge Council drafted a novel definition of 911 service that no one had ever seen, and in particular used the word connecting users to a 911 service. That was vague and ambiguous, and that's what gave rise to the problems that we encountered. Arguably, it could reach these consumer devices, which often cause trouble on the 911 network. Working with the committee staff for several hours, we realized that what we need to do is to tighten and accurately describe 911 service. Doing so excludes the possibility of reaching consumer devices because we have 30 years of law in statute and tariff that defines the 911 system. So we didn't need to reinvent new words. We've got settled law that has been around for 3 decades. So essentially, we tried to reinvent the wheel. It didn't work. We've now gotten back to the language in the analysis is drawn from both statute and tariff. It ties it to the 911 Emergency Act, and the language in Subdivision A tracks exactly our tariff language to make it clear that the liability protection being extended perfectly tracks that which was pre-existing for telephone companies in tariff. We believe this handles it. It's happened so quickly, I did not have time to work with the opposition. If more is needed, we commit to working in good faith with them. The only thing that we would say is that let's draw from existing language in statute and existing language in tariff. It's got a 30-year history. Everyone understands what it means. We would be happy to take anything that satisfies their concerns if drawn from existing sources. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next witness.
Catherine Pettibone with the Civil Justice Association of California in support of this measure. It provides existing immunity already provided traditional telephone providers to next generation or non-traditional providers. The state has an important policy in encouraging emergency response. This is a common sense measure that's going to help reduce dropped calls and encourage development to make sure that consumers can access the 911 services. We think it's narrowly drawn, and for these reasons, we support this measure.
Mr. Chairman and members, Matt Moretti with AT&T. We believe this bill will spur innovation and speed up the adoption of next generation 911, and we ask your support for the bill.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support?
Mr. Chairman, members, Bernie Orozco on behalf of the California Cable and Telecommunications Association, also in support. Thank you.
Pam Loomis on behalf of California's independent telephone companies, also in support.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members, Greg Cook, representing the California chapter of the National Emergency Number Association. Our association is made up of people from all aspects of the provision of 911 service, from the networks, from vendors, from public safety institutions specifically, and more importantly, the people who actually have to answer these calls. And that is the group that is opposing the bill in its present form and in its most amended form today. The amendment that you just adopted, sir, on page 3 of the analysis is the crux of our opposition. A retail or wholesale service provider of telecommunications service or other service involved in providing 911 service shall not be liable for any civil damage or loss caused by an act or omission in the design, development, installation, maintenance of provision of 911 service unless the act or omission that proximately caused the damage or loss constituted gross negligence, wanton or willful misconduct, or intentional misconduct. What a tremendous opening that is for companies to provide end-user services. We have an example just recently of a new Mercedes that was sold with an instrument in it that called 911 automatically. It drove around the Bay Area, and in less than 3 hours, over 1,000 calls were made to the PSAP operators, making those operators answering those calls they were not available to answer the calls of other people. This is a very serious problem. We support the next generation of 911 service, but this kind of exemption from liability is a bit too far. We have been working with the author's staff. We know that what they're trying to accomplish, and we want to be there with them. We've tried to work with the sponsor of the bill. In fact, the sponsor of the bill suggested an amendment. We accepted that amendment. Then the sponsor of the bill withdrew that amendment. The Judiciary Committee staff suggested an amendment. We supported that amendment, and then that amendment was not successful with the sponsor of the bill. We understand where folks want to go. We just want to be sure that the extent of liability is not something that can be granted to anyone who wants to hang something on the end of a 911 call. Thank you very much for your opposition to the bill.
Thank you. Next witness.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly Committee, my name is Josh Hart, Director of StopSmartMeters.org. There's a broad attack on landline telephone service in this country. AT&T has proposed to dismantle landline telephone service, which is a critical infrastructure, critical public service we depend on for safety, for access, for particularly the disabled, elderly people who may not have access to a cell phone or access to laptop computers. Landline telephone service is critical, and this is just one more step in the erosion of landline services that we need to have as an option to remain open for people who depend on this critical infrastructure. So we would urge a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness. Okay. Mr. Swanson, you have a question?
Yes, I just want to know if the author wanted to, or Verizon, or the sponsor wanted to respond to the statements.
I'll start and I'll let Mr. Devers continue. The intent of this bill is not to sort of make a distinction, actually not to make a distinction at all between landline and wireless or other technologies. The idea here is to foster an environment where innovation will get caught up with modern day times, and that is GPS type technology and others that are going to be yet determined out there. And so what we want to do with this measure is simply extend the same protections that the wireless 911 system currently enjoys to the the wired 911 system currently enjoys to other technologies, including wireless and other sort of innovations. And so with that, Mr. Devers can continue.
And I assume you're open to continue discussion with the...
We have been, and as you can tell at the opening of my statement here, we've worked laboriously here with the staff, and again, I'm indebted to them for their effort in trying to get there. But the point here is that we need to figure out how to move technology and law in a way that sort of maintains what's the reality now. The bill doesn't seek to get rid of wired service at all. It seeks to afford the same protection so that we can innovate and be more responsive to those 911 emergency calls.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd move the bill.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Okay. Any other comments, questions by committee members? Hearing none, seeing none. Mr. Fuentes, would you like to close?
Urge and I vote.
Thank you. It's due pass as amended to the Assembly floor, and I will state those amendments again. Mr. Fuentes, add intent language regarding the value of next generation 911 service. Add language which extends immunity protections for civil liabilities clarifies the definitions of public safety and 911 services. Specified bill provisions do not apply to service providers under tariff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Appreciate your work with this committee and accepting those amendments. I appreciate Ms. Fleming with all her hard work in bringing this bill to the point where it was acceptable by the author, and it will continue to work. So, Madam Secretary, please call the bill. A roll.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher. Fletcher, aye. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong. Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuentes, aye. Furutani. Gurel. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Huffman. Huffman, aye. Knight. Knight, aye. Ma. Ma, aye. Nastandi. Nastandi, aye. Skinner. Skinner, aye. Swanson. Swanson, aye. Valadeo. Valadeo, aye.
Ms. Fuentes, that bill's out 13-0. Congratulations. All right. Next bill is our last bill, and it's my bill, AB 1386. Mr. Fletcher, I'm going to hand over the gavel to you. And I just want to restate for all those who are here today, AB 449 and AB 1268 has been pulled from the agenda today, will not be heard. Again, I want to thank Mr. Blumenfield for moving his bill as well as Mrs. Mitchell to a two-year bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. File item 5, AB 1386.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This is a simple supplier diversity reporting bill. It's just straightforward. AB 1386. Currently, the state and federal government have placed priorities on the expansion of broadband services in underserved communities, making nearly $1 billion available for grants and loans. Cable companies have made significant infrastructure investments in broadband services, and direct broadcast providers who also support broadband applications have begun to petition the government for the opportunity to compete in these public broadband funds. As the state and federal government make public funds available to expand broadband services, it's important that we encourage companies that will benefit from these funds to provide contract opportunities to small businesses owned by women, minorities, and disabled veterans. This is essential to California's economic success because it's a majority minority state where women represent over 50% of California's population and the people of color represent over 60%. This cannot happen without a diverse workforce and contracting opportunities. AB 1386 will encourage cable television corporations and direct broadcast satellite providers to voluntarily adopt a plan for increase in women, minority, and disabled veteran businesses, enterprises, and procurement opportunities, and to voluntarily report this activity to the legislature on an annual basis. Current law already requires public utilities to report on their procurement with diverse businesses. This reporting has encouraged major companies to work with California's diverse business community and achieve greater profits. As a result of this information, California's largest utilities have increased their procurement with women, minority, and disabled veteran-owned businesses. In the most recent report, utility spending on diverse procurement increased to $3.4 billion in 2008, $4.27 billion in 2009, and will increase, and that's an increase of 23%. The same potential exists for cable and satellite providers. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. We have a motion by Mr. Fuentes, a second by Ms. Buchanan. Any witnesses in support? Any in opposition? Any questions from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, the motion is due pass. We'll call the roll.
Bradford.
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher.
Aye.
Fletcher, aye. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong.
Fong, aye.
Fong, aye. Fuentes? Fuentes, aye. Furutani? Guerrero? Hernandez? Hernandez, aye. Huffman? Huffman, aye. Knight? Ma? Ma, aye. Nastandi? Skinner? Skinner, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo?
As 10 votes, that bill is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. All right. We're going to hold a roll open for those absent members. We're going to hold it open for maybe another 5 minutes so they can add on. In the interest of time, and I want to respect, that's all the agenda items that we had on schedule today, but we understand that we have a couple of individuals in the audience that want to speak, and usually public comment is limited to agenda items or issues that are heard before this committee. Understanding that's not the case, we're going to make an exception and allow one speaker, understanding that you traveled, to have 3 minutes to address your issue of concern, and one speaker in opposition if they exist. So if you would like to come forward, we'll allow you to do that at this time. Please state your name and your organization.
My name is Joshua Hart. I'm the director of StopSmartMeters.org. I want to thank the committee members for giving us some time. People made travel plans to come and testify on AB 37, which was recently pulled from the agenda. I'm joined here by my friend Winifred, who will testify about her experiences with the smart meter. Smart meters have created a public health crisis in California. As my colleague Winifred will testify, she's been forced from her home because of the powerful spikes in radiation from her smart meter, not from her smart meter alone, but from her neighbors. Opt-out is not enough. We need an investigation. We need the Department of Public Health to find out why thousands of Californians are getting sickened. We run the website StopSmartMeters.org, which receives thousands of hits every day, and we are absolutely inundated by emails and phone calls, people getting headaches, tinnitus, sleeplessness, heart palpitations, a number of health problems. Now, we know that thousands of complaints have been lodged with the Public Utilities Commission. We're now up to 42 local governments throughout the state, cities and counties, who have opposed this smart meter program, this wireless program, and demanded an immediate moratorium. Instead of investigating the cause of the harm, working with the Department of Public Health, medical professionals to protect our public health, this state government has so far dropped the ball, leaving the Public Utilities Commission in charge of a process, which they have failed to do. Now, the Public Utilities Commission is chaired by President Michael Peavy, who's a former executive with Southern California Edison. They have not taken public testimony into account. They have not sought to resolve the situation in the interests of public health. The California Council on Science and Technology report, which was commissioned by this legislature, basically cut and paste from industry documents and presented not only a misleading idea of the power of radiation emissions from these smart meters, but an inaccurate one, basically using false information, which we hope will be corrected. There's been a report by Daniel Hirsch, a nuclear policy expert at UC Santa Cruz, who has analyzed this information and found that the emissions from smart meters are actually 100 times the strength of a cell phone, and this is currently mandatory. The reality is that these strong pulse microwaves from smart meters are approximately 100 times the strength of a cell phone, according to this independent analysis. The CCST used time averaging and mixed units, which are incorrect and inappropriate, to obscure the strong radiation from these meters. We want to say very clearly today that though we appreciate the efforts to have an opt-out proposal, at the very minimum, any opt-out proposal needs to be retroactive. It needs to allow for the ability to retain analog meters, and for those people who already have a smart meter and are suffering from one, to get an analog meter returned to their homes. There's many people, thousands and thousands of Californians who are living in communities burdened by the mesh network. There's no way you can opt out of living in a community that is burdened by millions of these microwave pulses. We ask you today to defend your constituents, to do your job, to go to the Department of Public Health, to call an immediate moratorium and a public health emergency. Thank you for this time. I want to introduce Winifred from Half Moon Bay. She'd like to speak about her experience with suffering from her smart meter.
Mr. Hart, before we do that, I'm going to let Mr. Huffman speak because I think it's his bill that was the genesis of much of this debate, and I want to first commend him for his hard work on AB 37, and despite the fact that it's not up to date, he's still working to address some of your concerns that have been voiced. So, Mr. Huffman.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and I also want to thank you for the very unusual courtesy, actually, of allowing folks a chance to speak on the record, even though the bill is not up. So that's not something we ordinarily do, and I think it speaks to it speaks to your courtesy as a chair, which I appreciate. And to all those who traveled here without knowing that my bill had been held in committee, I apologize. I put out press last week to try to get the word out precisely because I didn't want folks to have to travel if it wasn't necessary. So for those that didn't get the word, I apologize. But I do appreciate very much that many of you have supported my bill. I'm going to sit and certainly grant you the courtesy of listening, and we'll continue the dialogue on this. But I did want to state for anybody wondering why was the bill pulled, that we have seen quite a significant pivot, I believe, from both the PUC and PG&E on this issue. I acknowledge that it's not going to please everyone yet. It may never please everyone, but I'm sufficiently encouraged at the direction that the PUC has taken on this, that especially with PG&E's recent agreement to start waitlisting people who objected to the installation, I felt it was appropriate to let the PUC process unfold. One of the important things to remember about why I would show deference to a PUC process is that my bill, if you read it, wouldn't take effect until January, and then it would direct the PUC to begin a rulemaking. So the fastest I could make any kind of a difference on this issue, even if it, again, might not please everyone, would be sometime at the end of next year. I think this PUC process, which is now underway, has the opportunity to actually bring about something much, much faster than I would have been able to do in the best case legislatively. So I think it's just a smart idea to let that process have a chance, and that's what we are attempting to do. So thank you for being here, and for, again, Mr. Chair, for the courtesy of allowing me and those who have traveled to speak on the issue.
Mr. Huffman, will you ask the CCST to correct their false information contained in their report?
What I will do, Mr. Hart, is invite everybody who thinks there's a problem in the CCST report to point that out to them. I will tell you, I continue to hear some claims about that report which are false, including the one you just made about their time averaging. And I've looked into this with scientists. They assumed 100% maximum emission from that device 24 hours a day. This idea that they played around with the numbers is not true. So I'm going to take each of these concerns as I hear them, look into them, and if I think it's warranted, I'll ask CCST to look at it. But in that case, it's just not true.
Okay, again, I had stated only one speaker for and against, since we don't have anyone in
She
opposition.
traveled a long way. I really do
I know,
appreciate
and that's why
your
I'm
courtesy in allowing us to speak, but she's suffering right now from the electromagnetic fields in this room. And
Mr. Hart,
Mr.
Hart, thank you. As I stated, I was going to let one witness in opposition and one witness in support. Since we do not have someone in support, I'm going to allow two people to speak, and we'll limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Winifred Thomas, and I live in Half Moon Bay. And when smart meters were rolled out in my neighborhood, in hindsight, I realized they caused my health problems, but I didn't link it with that. A lot going on in my life. My mother's house burned. I stayed at her house for many months. But when I returned to my house full time, I couldn't sleep. I thought it was from stress, except that I was hot and dizzy. In February, I had an experience where I walked from my front door to my car, and I was hit in the head by something invisible. When I was able to recover from this enough, I got up and went to where I was, went into the direction of where it was, looked over the fence, and the new house next door, which had a temporary electrical up for 2 years, had a new smart meter. That smart meter, 25 feet away, hit through a redwood fence, hit me with such a great pulse of energy that I felt like I had been hit by a baseball bat, and I was in severe pain for days. My skin started flaking off, my face shriveling, my visions changed, my thinking impaired, my hands, fingers in pains, difficult to balance, and each night I would feel heat within my body which grew hotter and hotter. I was virtually bedridden and had someone coming in almost daily to help me with simple chores. 3 weeks ago, I finally put it all together, and that the smart meter next door was frying me. The old jokes about the poodle in the microwave oven, I am the poodle in the microwave oven. I put up a piece of sheet metal to shield my bedroom so that just between me and that smart meter doesn't shield my front or backyard, my kitchen, my living room, just my bedroom. And after months of not being able to sleep because I am so hot, within 2 days my body temperature dropped so that I had chills and I could not stay warm. I could barely think, I could barely move, I felt so tired I just wanted to die. And then I realized that I was experiencing some kind of hypothermia and my life was at risk. Fortunately, I'm trained in a bit of emergency medicine. I recognize the signs, and I did things to normalize my body temperature. I absolutely know that if I had remained much longer in that bedridden state, with that smart meter frying my body, that I would have lost the ability to maintain body temperature, and I would have died. It's been 3 weeks since I put up that sheet metal. When I'm able, I'm living in my car in places where there are fewer smart meters. And while my health is vastly improved from being away from that one smart meter, I am struggling with temperature fluctuations. My vision has not returned. I cannot be around cell phones without getting an instant headache. I have constant ringing in my ears, and I've developed an intermittent heart pain which terrifies me. These smart meters are hurting people. They need to be shut down immediately. I cannot live in my own home.
Thank you for your testimony. And again, I want to thank Mr. Huffman again for his work in this issue and bringing it forth. And as we stated, there's a PUC proceeding as it relates to smart meters, and we're going to let the PUC run its course, and hopefully we can address those concerns that have been voiced here today. Before adjourning, I just want to announce the final votes on the 4 bills that we have. AB 841 is out 14-0. AB 1073 out 14-0. AB 1074 out 14-0. And AB 1386 out 14-0. 11-0. I wanted it to be 14-0. It was 11-0. That ends the business of the day of the May 9th Utilities and Commerce Committee. We stand adjourned until the next meeting. Thank you.